It's November of 2022. The world is a little silly, perhaps a bit mad nowadays. Ever since the devastating and world-changing events at the start of 2020, reality seems to be shifting further and further from its original trajectory. You've done your best to ignore most of the strangeness, but on this particular day, you make the mistake of logging into Tumblr. Your dash is flooded with one thing and one thing only, but you have no idea what it is or where to start. The more you read, the more confused you get. The deeper you dig, the more surreal and hallucinatory it all seems. Are you alive? Are you dreaming? Are you living in the wrong reality? It doesn't seem like such a stretch to consider that you may be trapped in some human simulation. Or perhaps you're a character who's been placed into the wrong work of fiction. This movie, Goncharov, made news headlines, and yet you feel the very fabric of time-space shuddering around you whenever it is mentioned. These names have meanings, emotions, backstories, and yet none of them make any sense. 1,000 stories ebb and flow and repeatedly converge, forever changing. But fear not, you aren't hallucinating at all, nor are you trapped in some inexplicably strange alternate reality. Goncharov is real, and it's here to stay. Greetings, bookworms, and welcome to the never-ending library. Things have been a bit slow here lately as I've been in the process of moving, and relocating an entire labyrinth of eternal literature isn't exactly easy. However, I'm happy to announce that I've managed to find a solid schedule for recording again. Today we're going to be discussing a very intriguing lost cinematic masterpiece, Martin Scorsese's 1973 classic, Goncharov. This film, while it was critically acclaimed and had, at one point, a massive cult following, was lost for a long, long while. It was recently rediscovered and has since gained a second and even more radical cult following, with stunning visual shots, a compelling story that defies media standards of the times, and deep commentary on the dark nature of human compulsions. It's no wonder Goncharov blew up. As you may very well know, this movie had quite the active fan base. There are a ton of fascinating discussions breaking down the themes and struggles of the film, and all of them have made my time in the fandom incredibly entertaining. However, I'm not going to go too much into Goncharov meta in this video, but rather how and why it was lost, rediscovered, and is experiencing a revival. Now, before we get into proper media discussion, I'd like to dedicate this video to all you lovely Goncharovians out there. It's you fans who make this fandom such a joy to take part in, and without all of you, I never would have discovered such a fantastic movie. And, without further ado, let's talk about Goncharov. In 1969, Martin Scorsese met Matteo JWH J0715, a young half-Italian filmmaker with a big dream. Matteo's mother was Italian, while his father was a license plate, and so he was of mixed cultural background. His dream had always been to make movies, but since he himself was not a director, he was met with mixed success up until that point. But upon meeting Scorsese, things changed. This was the chance he needed. JWHJ0715 has said that he pitched the concept of Goncharov casually while at a bar, and that he never really intended anything to come of it. But Scorsese was immediately intrigued and hooked on the idea. So a week later, they began planning production, and by 1973, Goncharov was released into box offices in Russia. The movie follows Goncharov, a man with prominent ties to the Naples Mafia, and the events that happen when his new wife Katya discovers his involvement with organized crime. The exact setting of the film is left intentionally vague, likely as a means of shrouding our main character in mystery and suspense. There's a newspaper dated to 1973 at one point, but it's unclear if the whole movie is set in 1973 or if it was simply part of the film. Regardless, Goncharov is a surreal mafia thriller with a boatload of homoerotic subtext. Beautiful character moments, tragic romance, and above all, it's absolutely worth watching. That is, if you're able to find a stable stream link. Goncharov is a film with heavy queer subtext. At its core, Goncharov is a critique on the way in which queer identities were treated at the time. This movie was produced just barely after the end of the Hays Code, meaning that most queer media featuring queer characters or queer identities, while no longer required to follow a strict set of media guidelines, often did so anyways. The times were just such that any queer characters portrayed in a remotely positive light or given a happy ending were met with general public outcry. Goncharov is interesting in that it embraces, subverts, and deflects those expectations, all at the same time. The sheer level of homoeroticism was controversial at the time, both in the relationship between Katya, Goncharov's wife, and Sofia, and also in the relationship between Goncharov and Andrei. Some might argue that Goncharov could have been queerbaiting, but I personally think Goncharov is more a criticism of how society viewed the lives of nonconforming people at the time. There was this expectation that queer people were miserable and that any media portraying queer people would be miserable. But Goncharov's portrayal subverted a lot of these expectations. Goncharov and Sofia weren't miserable because their unrequited love was queer, but rather because they were trapped in a loveless marriage and involved with a literal mob. The misery that comes in Goncharov exists alongside the queer themes and not because of them, which is an important distinction to make that separates the movie from others at the time. But perhaps the most unique and interesting thing about this film is that it is a personalized viewing experience for every individual. Oh, but I'm not referring to the idea that every person has a different relationship with art. I mean that, quite literally, Goncharov is a different experience for every viewer. The film itself transcends reality, and the media gets injected directly into your subconscious brainwaves. This means that, while there is a consistent set of characters, themes, plot points, settings, and imagery, the exact premise is tailor-made to the individual's interests and preferences based on how their brain perceives the projection. It's almost like how you can feed a bunch of images to an AI system and it might spit out something semi-coherent, but way less morally despicable and without all the theft. Fuck AI art. Scorsese and JWHJ0715 created a cinematic experience that goes beyond the way mere mortals understand and interact with movies, and that alone should be celebrated. Why did Goncharov end up as a lost piece of media, you may be wondering? And furthermore, why was it found? Back in 1973, Soviet Russia was experimenting with hypnotism technology, using light fixtures from within the fourth dimension. Now, this technology was very rudimentary as far as humans using it went, and oftentimes it proved ineffective. The government hoped it could be used to further media censorship, which at the time was a growing concern. Naturally, I don't agree with any of this. I don't think any of us do. However, the Soviet government was extremely concerned with ensuring that their citizens would only remember government-approved media. Goncharov was, in essence, a test. They deployed their fourth-dimensional lighting fixtures in theaters playing Goncharov, set to go off at varying intervals throughout and after the movie. The light flashes were, naturally, so out of this realm that they blended seamlessly with the already surreal meshing of visual symbolism and gun violence, so audience members were none the wiser. Now, this technology, while very rudimentary, had its efficacy greatly increased by the sheer number of times the average person went to view Goncharov while it was in theaters. It was simply impossible for someone to go see the movie just once. In fact, it was outright illegal. Now, I'm not technically supposed to talk about this because forgotten human history is better off forgotten, and as an omniscient being of eldritch chaos, I could seriously disrupt the balance of time-space, but one lesser-known law within the Soviet Union was that all citizens were obligated to attend government-mandated showings of various movie selections over the course of the decades. Since censorship was so strict, more often than not, citizens would be required to view the same movies over and over again. Thus, by luring citizens in with a very popular and yet homoerotic film, the Soviet government was able to test their very imperfect hypnotism technology, so even though it wasn't the most effective hypnosis, the repetition was ultimately what led every individual who saw the film to forget its existence. And naturally, it was only rediscovered once individuals who had never been exposed to the hypnosis experiment were able to come across remnants of the film's past while browsing the internet. Of course, we all know how that ended up playing out. Oh, uh, we appear to be getting a broadcast from the Soviet government? One moment, please.
Forget all that you have seen. It is for the best. No mortal can comprehend the might of the film, nor can any mortal comprehend the wrath of those who made it. Let your mind be free. Do not think about the ticking thread clocks.
Huh? How strange. I think for a moment I was discussing history within the wrong frame of reality. I don't remember what we were talking about. Sorry. My ADHD has been really bad lately. I must have left the recording going through all of my spacing out, but apologies. Even still, I hope you all appreciated the small update, and I'll tune in with you guys again next week.